Well, it is my extreme privilege and pleasure to introduce the first of our distinguished speakers tonight, author and professor Dr. Anthony Esolen. Dr. Esolen teaches Renaissance English literature and the development of Western civilization. He's also a senior editor for Touchstone magazine, a journal of mere Christianity, which I could say one of the finest magazines out there, and very unique in that it brings three streams of Christianity together: Orthodox, Catholic, and Evangelical. Fantastic magazine. He's also a regular contributor to Crisis Magazine and LifeSiteNews. And although many in the room would love to hear Dr. Esolen talk about Shakespeare and Dante, tonight he is here to talk about the issue that we loosely call the culture. Dr. Esolen is an eloquent and impassioned essayist whose persistent work in the defense of life, marriage, and family, and sexuality can teach us much about standing for truth even when it's costly. There are too few public intellectuals with the courage to withstand the slings and barbed arrows of homosexual activists. Anthony Esolen is one. Please extend a warm welcome to Dr. Anthony Esolen.
Thank you, Julia. I better live up to that now. I don't feel that I have a great deal of courage. All I think about myself is that I notice things that are right out in front of my nose, and I write about them. I suppose that that's a rare thing these days, but that's 90% of what I do is to notice things and say, hey. The name of my talk today, the title of the talk is called Reviving the Chest. And I'm taking it from C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man. That is, we're making human beings here without chests, bellies, and heads in the service of the bellies, rather. Okay, so as you all know, a few months ago, the supreme sophist of our nation, Anthony Kennedy, you've heard of him, right? I mean, he's one of the justices of the Supreme Court Royal over the undifferentiated masses. Anthony Kennedy decreed that to deny a man and a man the social sanction they need to pretend publicly that they can marry, that it's feasible. I'm, of course, using my own meek words. My words don't mount as on wings of eagles, as his do. But to deny them that would be to rob them of, and this was the key of the whole opinion, dignity. Meanwhile, as we've also found out in the last several weeks, at the hundreds of Planned Parenthood butcher shops and baby salvage yards across the country, small human beings are cannibalized for fun and profit. The fun already had by its mother and father, the profit to accrue to the dealers in livers, gaskets, hearts, ignitions, brains, and catalytic converters. The idea that these small human beings might be worthy of honor might have occurred long ago to the Roman Catholic, Kennedy. But if I may alter the words of my beloved John Milton, honor into the mind of man or devil may come and go, so unapproved. When there's a conflict between the dignity of an unborn child and the license to rut in the alleys of our choice, we know what must take priority. Throw dignity to the dogs, we'll none of it. It is in the nature of evil to disintegrate, to collapse into its own chaos of contradictions. And I think we're witnessing a case of that disintegration now. His mysteriousness Kennedy, Grand High Mystical Poobah, has invoked the notion of dignity, but dignity must rest upon objective value, the very thing which he has denied, both to unborn children and to marriage properly speaking. Dignity demands not that we assign meanings to things, as our magician and poetaster said long ago in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that part of the opinion which was justly derided as the sweet mystery of life passage. Dignity demands that we bow to the meanings in things. We don't assign them the meanings, we find them and we honor them. Otherwise, what we call dignity would be no more than a pleasant social convention, a fiction. Like a green piece of paper that says that the bearer is entitled to $10 or whatever it is. It's worth in itself nothing. It's not gold. But if we're to talk about dignity without fooling ourselves, we must be talking about gold and not paper, a thing of genuine beauty. We recognize literally what a thing is worth. And if we had a truly human education, which is rarer and rarer these days, if we've had that education, we experience feelings that are in accord with that judgment. For instance, we see a married man and woman holding hands while their small child plays in the grass before them. No government can confer dignity upon them, as Justice Thomas in his dissent rightly observed. They possess it by virtue of their being, shining forth in their deeds. We feel it before we can analyze it. And in fact, to analyze it is to risk smothering the feeling itself. We see what is, to use the Catholic phrase, dignum et justum, right and just. It befits the man and the woman to be for one another in the unbreakable bond of marriage. And it befits them that their love should issue forth in that chattering little boy, their own flesh and blood. Or we see what I saw a few days ago, a sight that should greet us almost every day, and once did greet people almost every day. That was when boys and girls, back in the day when there were boys and girls, when they were raised to appreciate one another and treat one another with courtesy. I saw a boy and a girl at a restaurant. They were maybe 18 or 19 years old. He was leaning forward. He was rosy-faced with gladness, talking and beaming, and she was replying and smiling shyly in return. I might say, taking a cue from C.S. Lewis, that the whole of politics and economy and education are ultimately for just that a clean-minded boy over the moon in love should chatter away with a pretty girl at a diner on a Sunday after church. All of technology, all of education, all of politics is ultimately for that. We smile upon it. That is a right response. Right responses are the first aim of true education. We don't have that anymore. That's the heart of Lewis's work, The Abolition of Man. Lewis recommends to us the grand sentiments of Samuel Johnson on the power of special places. And Johnson is giving us a right feeling. That man is little to be envied, said Johnson, whose patriotism would not gain force upon the plains of Marathon, or whose piety would not grow warmer among the ruins of Iona. For the better part of 100 years now, we've been raising up what Lewis called men without chests. That is, human beings without that important middle part that mediates between base appetites and rationality. These are human beings trained up in the habits of sophistry. They pride themselves on their critical thinking. I hate the phrase. Somebody can tell me what the difference is between thinking and critical thinking. But the critical thinkers have never gotten around to subjecting their own phrase to a little bit of thinking. Well, they pride themselves on their critical thinking as they march along over the brink with a million other clever lemmings, stepping off the solid natural law and into the void. Honor is beneath them. They do not remember the dead. They hold things to be good only insofar as they are useful to bring about a desired political end. Machiavelli, who may be their master, is better than they are. When he came home from a day spent in undignified drinking and dicing with ruffians, he retired to his chamber and changed his clothes. He put on a special robe before he opened his beloved Livy. Machiavelli would not address the ancient historians with dirty hands and feet. Our Machiavellians do not even know Livy, and they would laugh at the modesty of that old Florentine. But now here is our opening as Christians, as people of faith. The enemy has overplayed his hand. Always will, always does. Let's take up that notion of dignity. Take it now first from the other direction, that of indignity. If the greater part of a humane education is to raise young people who honor what is true and good and beautiful, so the lesser part of the education, raise up young people who blush with shame or turn away with disgust or rise up with indignation against what is false, despicable, crude, tawdry, and ugly, what is not worthy of a man, not worthy of a woman. And by the way, maybe this is why, if you want to know, if you're thinking about why don't we teach the humanities in our schools anymore? Or why are the students reading stupid things like the Hunger Games and other porno twaddle? Why is that? Well, maybe it's because there's a secret fear, a suspicion, hatred of the humanities because they show how paltry and puny we are by comparison. Anyway, let me give you an example that has nothing to do with the particular madness over sex that we're prey to now. It's often useful to change the terms of the argument. So, the scene is Carthage, 16 centuries ago. The subject is a sensitive youth named Alypius. The boy's friends are going to watch the gladiatorial games at the city arena. They want to drag Alypius along. He knows the games are evil, but he puts too much trust in his reason. I might say he's rather like certain parents of children who say, well, it's okay for me to send my children into the brothel because, you know, my children, my 8-year-old is perfectly going to withstand those temptations. You know. He puts too much trust in his reason, just as these parents do, send kids into public sewers and lobotomy chambers, schools. Put too much trust in a couple of verses from the Bible and the Catechism. Now, Alypius' heart is in the right place. So would those children's hearts be, right? And so the parents, too. Heart is in the right place. He does have a chest, but it's a weakling chest. It's untried against the battalions of the enemy. So Alypius goes to the arena. He intends to avert his eyes till a great roar from the crowd piques his curiosity, and he looks. And he falls. His friend St. Augustine says, as soon as he saw that blood, he drank down savagery. He did not turn aside, but fixed his gaze upon it, drinking down the furies themselves in his ignorance, delighting in the wickedness of the fight, and reeling with a bloodthirsty joy. The hook dug deep. Alypius became a fanatic of the games, even enticed others to come along to revel in the cruelty. What happened here? We have men fighting one another to the death for the entertainment of bored urbanites, officials from the capital, taking in the games before they retire to their upscale homes in Fairfax County. Valor and manhood are reduced to the excitations of baited animals in a circus. Are gladiators worthy of honor? Do they possess dignity? The Romans tried to dress them in the trappings of dignity. Hail Caesar, gladiators were instructed to cry out. We who are about to die salute you. And then you'd have maybe a nude slave playing Neptune, armed with a net and a trident, against a man armed with breastplate and sword, while hookers worked the stands and vendors sold wine and bread and cheese. To be so reduced is an indignity. So is to enjoy watching it. The proper response to the disvalue of the gladiatorial contests is horror and disgust and contemptuous pity for those who are drunk with the thrill of it. Do we have now anything comparable to the indignity of those games? Well, not football. I know, I like football. As brutal as that game can sometimes be. Has to be worse than football. Has to be something whose very tang consists in its being evil, whose grossness pleases the palate that is used to it, even craves it, and contrives more and more bizarre ways to try to glut the insatiable craving. Is there anything like the games? We know what it is. I don't even have to mention it, do I? with this qualification, that porn has rotted out far more souls and destroyed far more families or prospects for families than ever the gladiatorial arenas did. What would the great and powerful wizard of Washington, Anthony Kennedy from the land of E pluribus unum, say if we demanded that porn be curbed on the grounds that it ruins lives? It is not speech, let alone constitutionally protected speech, but simulated action and obscenity. Would he say that we were denying the dignity of the woman splayed across the cover of Cosmopolitan? Of course, there are much worse than that. Even he must acknowledge that the battle against pornography is not over persons, but deeds, and whether those deeds are worthy of the persons who perform them. And let's be clear about this. We'd be saying more than that the pornography was immoral. There are a lot of things that are immoral that do not directly undermine, directly attack the very dignity of a human being. We would be doing more than denying that it had dignity. We would be crying out against its indignity. We want more than to raise children who are not delighted by it or who avoid it. We want to raise children who are disgusted by it and disappointed in the wretched people who make it and who use it. That's what we want. And when we see that, we see that there can be no compromise, okay? I want to invoke here what I sometimes call the nude beach principle. And it shows the complete shallowness and self-contradictions inherent in strict libertarianism. You can say all you want, you can say all day long, listen, you can go to that beach over there, and if you feel that you ought to wear clothes, you can wear a bathing suit, but you don't have to. And so what's the difference to you? Well, the difference is that once the nudity is allowed, the beach is completely different, okay? Once the indignity is allowed, it changes the whole thing for everyone, even those people, and maybe especially those people who don't wish to engage in it. There can be no compromise. You can't have half of a nude beach. A beach in which some people are walking around stark naked is a nude beach. That's all there is to it, okay? When a normal, healthy boy hears for the first time that what some men do to other men or to boys, his first reaction should be physical and moral nausea. That's not merely a bodily reaction. Just it's not merely a bodily reaction when we look on a great waterfall, to use another of Lewis's examples, and declare that it is sublime. Given the sorts of creatures we are, our intellectual and moral judgments should have, a physical correlate. And these days, the stronger that correlate is, the better for us. For every one pupil, says Lewis, who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. And let me add here that this is immediately applicable to the idiotic idea that you can teach young children about our sexual being by pretending that it's all a matter of hygiene. Plato knew better than that. We're talking about that great, powerful, and possibly destructive drive of eros. The only creatures for whom sex could possibly ever be safe are robots. Maybe it bespeaks the underlying materialism of our time. My friend David Hart says that every young materialist philosopher dreams of someday growing up to be a robot. Maybe we have educators who dream of someday training their children up to be happy robots in a clean, hygienic, and all-controlled society. No. We have to irrigate those deserts. We have to inculcate the just sentiments. We have the inestimable advantage of being grounded in reality. What the married man and woman do together is dignum et justum, right and just, not because of what we say about it, but because of what it is. Our sentiments follow from that reality. But when a man abuses his manhood, please pardon me, inserting the organ of generation into the back end of the alimentary canal of another man, sowing the precious seed of new life in the region of disease and decay, mingling it with feces, is not worthy of him. It is not as right as rain or as true as a level beam. A man who tricks himself out as a woman is not, insofar as he is a human being, worthy of contempt. No human being as a human being is worthy of contempt. But what he does is contemptible. It's a reduction. He treats the great mystery of manhood as if it were play clothes in the attic. Again, we see the principle most clearly if we turn to actions not now in contention. How do you respond to a con artist who cheats a widow out of her husband's annuity with anger and contempt? Is that a violation of the dignity of the con artist? On the contrary, it affirms it. We feel the contempt because we judge he's done something base and cowardly, unworthy of the man he should be. And now we see a once great nation ready to trade in all of its hard-won liberties just to affirm the inestimable good of what? Meaningless sexual intercourse, sodomy? Recall what Thomas More said to the perjurer Richard Rich. He sold his testimony so that he might become Attorney General for Wales. The Lord has said to us, said Thomas, it profits a man nothing to gain the whole world, yet to lose his own soul. But for Wales? We've traded the freedom of our country so that we can have HBO? So must we say, so must we feel in our pulses, in our chests, in the marrow of our bones. We've traded our birthright for porn, for fornication, for men in bras, panties, for that. Because we affirm the true dignity of our fellow men, we must feel the indignity of what they and we have become. We must love the sinner, the con artist, the pornographer, and so forth. Let's try to love him with all the all-embracing and all-purifying charity of Jesus, to love him as we would be loved. We're wretched sinners also. But the first response to the sin itself is often not to say a word, but to turn in fullness of feeling and shed a tear or spit. Thank you, folks.